How would I take the big?
All right, on this lovely day, we are going to learn to do two things. One, we're going to write linear equations. We're also going to graph linear equations. Before we get into the actual process of that, we do need to recollect what the Gehenna a slope is. What does slope mean? A number that describes the slant of a line. So how steep is the line? Now, when we start talking about it in terms of pure math, we can write it like this. We always use the letter M for slope, probably because a Frenchman came up with it, and the French word for mountain is something like monter. Soissons, monter, something like that. All right, so now many of you have already described it as such. Rise over run is one way to say. Another way to say it is you take your y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1.
We ain't got no room.
Lastly, this is like if you're super ultra mathematician, you'll use this Greek letter delta. You'll say delta y over delta x. And delta simply means change. Delta means change. All right, so we know most of us are familiar already with slope. So if I have this point going to this point right here, and we wanted to figure out what the slope was, we see that it is a positive slope. We'll get to that in a second. And I want to see how much I go up, 1, up 2, up 3. So the change in y is positive 3. And now if I were going the other way, positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So my change in x is positive 6. And that's to get from this point up to that point. What's the pattern that I do to get there? Now clearly once I write this slope, which is m equals 3 over 6, it can reduce to be 1/2. So the official slope here would be 1/2. I can do just a matter of counting. That's one method to do it. The other way to do it will be to do the subtractions, which we'll get to in a bit. Next thing we're going to look at are the types of slopes. And I heard it called out before. Some of us said positive, some of us said negative. So we're going to see a few types of slopes. Number one is if you have what's called a positive slope, that simply looks like as you read, it goes up. The line goes up as you read from left to right. We call that a positive slope. As expected, a negative slope would do the inverse. It would go down as you read. That's a negative slope. Next, you could have a slope that is completely flat. That we call where slope equals 0. It can also be called zero slope. Slope equals 0 is slightly different than zero slope. Some people also might want to describe the line in this case. And if you could say it's a horizontal line. Horizontal line. The last thing is going to be no slope.
Is that the same as undefined?
And that is another way of saying undefined. And another way of looking at that is, say, for example, you're calculating and you get 6 over 0. That is mathematically impossible, so we say that it is undefined or there is no slope. This is one of the few times in math where the word no does not mean 0. Oftentimes, if we say, I have no dollars, I write down a big 0. But in this case, no slope and zero slope mean something different. And of course, we see that a no slope would be bungee jumping. Straight down, straight up. Is just simply using our change in y over the change in x. So if I start here at my second y, and I subtract my first y, it should read like this. Minus a positive 5. Now, beware of what happens, because when we have a double negative, it's wise to write those. So that's what's going to happen in the next case. Here I have a 3, and I'm going to subtract the negative 2. Now, some of you quickly recognize and say, oh, but Swenson, isn't the double negative there become a positive? And I'll say yes to that. The problem is that if you started off by writing that, like this, you might get confused later and try to always put plus in between. So be in the habit of putting a double negative, but then just changing it after you've done it.
Wait.
No. All right, now to finish this guy up here, negative 9 in the numerator and a positive 5 in the denominator. Since neither of those reduce any further, our answer is negative 9/5.